Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a major development, really shaking up the U.S. electronics industry, the anticipated 2025 tariffs. We've got a fresh report here that, well, it really pulls back the curtain on the challenges and, the potential transformations heading our way. So, at its core, what are we looking at?
Well, we're dissecting a new set of tariffs. They're targeting crucial components and finished goods, too, in the electronics sector. This report lays it out pretty clearly.
Okay.
A key element is the significant 25% tariff on semiconductors and microchips originating from China.
25%? Wow.
Yeah, and this is particularly important when you think that over 36% of these vital building blocks used in U.S. electronics, they come from China.
Over a third.
Exactly. So the core insight here really is that these tariffs are forcing a fundamental rethink of the whole semiconductor supply chain for American manufacturers.
Right, and it's not just about those tiny but mighty chips, is it?
No, not at all. We're also seeing a 20% tariff slapped on lithium-ion batteries and power storage devices.
Okay, batteries too.
And China, as the report really underscores, is the undisputed king there, responsible for over 70% of global production.
70%.
Huge number. Then you've got tariffs ranging from, say, 10 to 15% hitting everyday gadgets, things like laptops, tablets, the LED displays we all use.
So the stuff we buy all the time.
Exactly. And these tariffs on consumer electronics, they could really impact what ends up in your shopping cart.
How so?
Well, the report estimates a potential reduction in U.S. consumer purchasing power between a staggering USD 90 billion and USD 143 billion.
That's massive. Billion with a B.
It is. Essentially, these tariffs act like a tax, right, on imported goods. Businesses either have to absorb that cost, which, squeezes their profit,
Or they pass it on.
or they pass it on to you through higher prices, meaning your dollar buys less tech.
Okay.
This could lead to, well, pretty substantial drops in purchases. Projections show potential declines of up to 68% for laptops and tablets.
68%. That's huge.
Yeah. As much as 58% for gaming consoles, and even smartphone purchases could see a dip of up to 37%.
So a real slowdown.
The core insight is a potential slowdown in consumer electronic sales and, a direct hit to household budgets.
Okay, let's unpack this. So this isn't just companies facing higher costs. It sounds like we as consumers are likely to feel this directly in the price tags, availability.
Very likely.
So what's our roadmap for this deep dive then? How are we going to tackle this?
We're going to break this down. We'll examine how these tariffs are likely to hit specific corners of the electronics world, different subsectors.
Right.
We'll also dig into just how much the U.S. relies on electronics coming from China, the scale of it.
Okay.
Then the various hurdles manufacturers are facing, and crucially, how market research is stepping in to help companies navigate this shifting terrain.
So using research to find a path forward.
Exactly. Our aim is really to give you a clear, digestible understanding of what could be a pretty complex situation.
Sounds important. Let's get into those specific areas. Where are we seeing the most immediate heat? Which sectors are feeling it first?
Well, the report shines a light on several key areas, starting with home and building automation.
Okay, smart homes.
Think about your smart thermostats, lighting systems, security cameras, all those interconnected devices, right, that make our homes and buildings smarter. These rely heavily on components like semiconductors, wireless modules, sensors, and critically, those lithium-ion batteries we mentioned.
Right.
A significant chunk of which are either sourced from or assembled in China.
And these tariffs are making those essential components more expensive then.
Exactly. The report points to cost increases of up to 20% for these parts.
20%.
And the ripple effects are quite significant. We're seeing delays in, say, home automation installation projects.
So projects getting pushed back.
Yeah, and a real squeeze on the profit margins for the B2B system integrators, the companies that put these systems together for businesses. The core insight is that the whole smart home revolution might face some, speed bumps because of these increased component costs.
So what are these companies doing about it? Are they just, taking the hit on their bottom line?
Not entirely, no. We're seeing companies like Honeywell, Alarm.com, as the report mentions, actively revisiting their bills of materials.
Verbondums, right. The parts lists.
Exactly. The detailed list of all the parts that go into a product. And they're aggressively searching for new suppliers, looking at regions like India, Eastern Europe, Mexico.
Diversifying.
Yeah. And there's also a move towards redesigning products, trying to reduce their reliance on those specific components that are getting hit hard by the tariffs.
Interesting. So they're trying to engineer their way around the tariffs, in a way.
Sort of, yeah.
What about the workhorses of our digital lives, computer hardware? Laptops, desktops?
Ah, that sector?
Yeah.
The report emphasizes it's facing a particularly steep challenge.
Why is that?
Well, the reliance on Chinese manufacturing for fundamental components, things like motherboards, processors, RAM, GPUs, it's incredibly deep.
Really embedded.
Totally. Even if the final assembly happens elsewhere, say in Southeast Asia, many of the smaller but critical subcomponents often originate in China.
Right.
This deep entrenchment of Chinese manufacturing in core PC components means consumers are likely to see, well, significant price hikes, or maybe a slower pace of tech advancement as manufacturers scramble for alternatives.
And those tariffs we talked about earlier, up to 25% on some key items, they're really adding to the cost there.
Absolutely. It's significantly inflating the overall cost to build computers. It's pushing PC makers and what we call OEMs.
Original equipment manufacturers?
Right. The company's actually putting the final product together.
Yeah.
It's pushing them to desperately look for other places to source their components. Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, they're getting a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And some of the bigger players are even considering bringing some production closer to home, near-shoring, they call it. Mexico, maybe even the U.S. Midwest.
That sounds like a massive logistical puzzle, though. What about the smaller companies in this space? Are they coping?
Well, the mid-sized firms are in a particularly tight spot, it seems. They're not only dealing with those rising input costs, but also a more constrained supply of components generally, which leads to uncertain delivery times, lead time uncertainty, and this constant pressure to carefully manage their inventory.
Tough position. Okay, let's switch gears. Communication electronics, things like routers, 5G antennas, network gear. How are the tariffs playing out there?
Well, this sector was already navigating some, let's say, tricky waters, mostly related to national security concerns, particularly regarding companies like Huawei and ZTE.
Right, that's been in the news.
Exactly. So the new tariffs on importing Chinese networking equipment, they're basically making these existing headwinds even stronger.
So it's not just about the price tag here. There are these other layers of complexity involved.
Exactly. The increased cost is pushing telecom companies and those building infrastructure for businesses to explore alternative suppliers. They're looking at Japan, South Korea, the EU.
Could that cause more?
The challenge, of course, is that these alternatives often come with a higher price tag.
Right.
Yeah. And this is where market research is proving invaluable. It's helping companies identify reliable vendors in these other regions.
Right.
Vendors who can not only meet their tech specs, but also have the capacity for large-scale production and, importantly, adhere to all the necessary regulations and compliance standards, finding trusted partners, basically.
It really sounds like a global reshuffling of who makes what. It's fascinating. What about medical electronics? You'd think maybe tariffs wouldn't touch something so vital.
Unfortunately, they do, yeah. Think about diagnostic imaging machines like MRIs or CT scanners,
Okay.
wearable health trackers, even those hospital-grade infusion pumps you see.
Right. Critical stuff.
Very. These sophisticated devices rely on very precise sensors, embedded microcontrollers, and what are called PCB assemblies, printed circuit boards.
The circuit boards, yeah.
And a significant portion of these have historically been sourced from China because, well, it was cost-effective and there were established supplier relationships.
So these tariffs are adding to the already significant costs of developing and manufacturing these medical devices.
Precisely. And it's not just the higher cost of the components themselves. The report suggests it's also leading to delays in the already lengthy process of getting regulatory approvals.
Oh, wow. So impacting rollouts, too.
Yeah, and launching new products. As a result, medical device companies here in the U.S. are increasingly turning to market research. They need to investigate global sourcing options, verify the qualifications of potential new suppliers.
And diligence.
Exactly. Understand the regulatory timelines in different countries, and assess whether it's even feasible to move production to places like, say, India, Hungary, or the Czech Republic.
That's a real eye-opener. Okay, and finally, let's look at industrial electronics, the kind of nuts and bolts of manufacturing automation. How are they being affected?
Right. This sector, it includes things like automation controllers, PLCs.
Programmable logic controllers.
Yep, the brains of industrial machines, basically, and industrial-grade sensors, too. This area imports a significant volume of semiconductors and those PCB assemblies that are now subject to these tariffs.
Okay.
The immediate result: an increase in the unit costs for U.S. manufacturers of industrial equipment, which makes it tougher for them to stay competitive price-wise.
And this must have a knock-on effect on many other industries that rely on this equipment, right? Like auto manufacturing or energy.
Absolutely. Companies in sectors like automotive, oil and gas, process automation, they're feeling the pressure. They need to avoid disruptions in their own production lines due to these higher equipment costs.
So where do they go?
Well, they're using market research to get a better handle on their risks, particularly related to their current inventory levels. They're adjusting their procurement strategies, how they buy components in response to these trade changes, and even figuring out, modeling how much of these increased costs they might need to pass on to their own customers down the line. Cost pass-through scenarios.
Wow. So across all these different types of electronics, smart home, computers, networking, medical, industrial, these tariffs are creating some serious waves. Let's zoom out for a moment. Just how much of the electronics we use in the U.S. actually comes from China? The numbers must be pretty significant given all this disruption.
They are. The report gives us some clear figures here. In 2023, the U.S. imported a total of $455 billion worth of electrical machinery and electronics.
Okay, total imports, $455 billion.
Right. Of that, approximately $119 billion came directly from China.
$119 billion out of 455. That's what, over a quarter?
Just about, yeah. And this includes everything from those sophisticated semiconductors we talked about to the consumer gadgets we use every day. And those critical PCB assemblies and sensors that are inside so many devices, it's a big chunk of the pie.
That is a significant portion.
Yeah.
And as we've been discussing, it's that deep reliance that creates this kind of cascading effect when tariffs are introduced, isn't it?
Exactly. But the interconnectedness, it goes even deeper. It's more complex than just direct imports.
How so?
The U.S. also imports an additional maybe $50 to $60 billion worth of electronics-related components and materials from other countries, intermediaries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan.
Okay, so parts from other places too.
Right. But here's the fascinating part. These intermediary partners themselves often source a significant portion of their subcomponents, the ingredients, if you will, from China.
Ah, so China is further up the supply chain, even for parts made elsewhere.
Precisely. Think of it like a recipe. Even if the final cake is baked, say, in Vietnam, the flour might still come from China, the sugar from somewhere else. If there's a problem with the flour supply or it gets more expensive.
It affects the whole cake no matter where it's baked.
Exactly. So even if a product doesn't have a Made in China label right on the final box, its cost and availability are often still heavily influenced by China's vast manufacturing ecosystem.
Wow.
This really underscores the widespread inflationary pressure these tariffs are creating, potentially hitting many different electronics categories, even indirectly.
It's like pulling one thread and seeing the whole thing unravel a bit, or at least get tangled. So, okay, for the manufacturers who are so heavily dependent on these Chinese supply chains, what kind of direct impact are they feeling right now? What are the big challenges?
Well, the challenges are substantial. As the report highlights, many U.S. electronics companies operate on, frankly, fairly tight profit margins.
There's a lot of wiggle room.
Not much, and many rely on what's known as just-in-time manufacturing, JIT.
Right. Keep inventories low.
Very lean inventories, which means they're incredibly sensitive to any sudden increases in costs or delays in getting the materials they need. So with these new tariffs in place, many are reporting a significant rise in their input costs. The report suggests anywhere from 18 to 25%, particularly for those crucial components like PCBs, memory chips, processors that have traditionally come from China.
18 to 25% increase. That's huge for thin margins.
It can be crippling.
And what about the alternative sourcing options we touched on earlier?
Yeah.
Places like Southeast Asia or Mexico, are they a straightforward solution? Just switch suppliers?
Not entirely. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
While, yes, contract manufacturers in Southeast Asia and Mexico have become more appealing, they're now facing their own set of challenges, namely capacity bottlenecks. They're getting swamped with demand.
Everyone's rushing there at once.
Kind of, yeah. And that leads to price increases from them, too, because of the surge in demand from companies trying to shift away from Chinese suppliers.
Okay, so it's not necessarily cheaper.
Not always. And relocating production also isn't as simple as just flipping a switch, you know?
Right.
It involves significant upfront investments, capital costs, plus the need to train a whole new workforce and navigate completely unfamiliar regulatory environments in these new regions. It takes time and money.
So it's not just finding a new factory, it's a whole new set of hurdles to overcome. And these delays in getting essential components, whether from China or trying to switch, that must be impacting their ability to actually produce and sell their goods.
Absolutely. Delays in sourcing critical components are definitely slowing down their production cycles. It's extending the time it takes to bring new products to market, their time to market, and even jeopardizing their planned launch dates sometimes.
Yes, deadlines.
Yeah. And this, in turn, leads to shortages and back orders, which, as you can imagine, frustrates distributors, retailers, and ultimately us, the consumers, waiting to buy these products.
It sounds like a really complex, tangled situation with a lot of interconnected problems.
Yeah.
So how can market research even begin to help companies navigate all this uncertainty? It feels like you're facing so many moving targets at once.
That's precisely why market research has become such an indispensable tool right now.
More than just nice to have.
Oh, yeah, much more. In this kind of volatile environment with unpredictable tariff changes, geopolitical instability, it provides that much-needed guidance. It's no longer just about understanding what consumers want. It's become fundamental for adapting how companies buy their parts, how they manufacture their goods, how they set their prices in this new reality.
Okay.
Given all these disruptions and uncertainties in the supply chain, it sounds like companies are desperately seeking some kind of guidance, some clarity, and that's where the role of market research becomes really critical, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems essential. Let's drill down on that then. What are the specific ways market research is proving helpful? How is it actually being used?
Okay, one of the most crucial ways is through supplier mapping and risk assessment.
Supplier mapping.
Yeah, it's about going beyond just knowing who your current suppliers are. It's about actively identifying potential alternatives in regions less impacted by these tariffs.
Right.
You know, Vietnam, India, Poland, Mexico, places we mentioned.
Right.
But it's not just about finding someone who can make the part. It's about thoroughly evaluating their reliability, their production capacity, their transportation infrastructure, even the political and economic stability of those countries.
All the surrounding factors.
Exactly. Market intelligence provides that deeper analysis, looking at things like shipping times, customs processes, trade agreements, local labor laws, everything. This allows companies to strategically diversify their supplier base and, hopefully, build more resilient supply chains, less dependent on one single source.
That makes perfect sense. You can't just jump from one supplier to another without understanding all the potential downsides and risks. What's another key area where market research is proving its worth?
Component cost and pricing analysis. That's vital.
Tracking the money.
Pretty much. With tariffs causing these dramatic shifts in import costs, companies need a very clear, very up-to-date understanding of the pricing for essential components, semiconductors, batteries, PCBs, sensors. Market research helps track these component-level prices. It helps predict future trends based on factors like, say, the availability of raw materials or the behavior of suppliers. And ultimately, this informs how they negotiate their sourcing contracts.
Gives them leverage, maybe.
Potentially, yes, or at least information. It also helps them evaluate whether it makes sense to form longer-term partnerships with suppliers in countries with lower tariffs, or even, as we discussed, to rethink their product designs to reduce reliance on those really high-cost components.
Okay.
And in industries that produce huge volumes of products like consumer electronics, even small savings per unit can have a massive impact on their overall profitability. Margins matter.
Right, those pennies add up fast in high volume. So it's about understanding not just the current costs, but also anticipating where those costs might be headed. How else is market research contributing? What other tools are they using?
Through bill of materials optimization. BOM optimization.
Okay, optimizing that parts list.
Exactly. Market research helps companies pinpoint exactly which components in their products are most affected by the new tariffs. Which lines on the BOM are suddenly much more expensive. This then allows them to investigate potential substitutes, either by finding alternative suppliers for a similar part, or maybe by re-engineering the product itself to minimize or even eliminate the need for certain tariffed parts.
Changing the recipe.
Kind of, yeah. We're seeing examples of companies switching to maybe local or regional alternatives, adjusting the technical specifications of their products slightly, or finding new ways to assemble them. This is particularly relevant for products like smart home devices, wearables, industrial IoT modules, where having that flexibility in the components they use can be key to maintaining competitive pricing and also meeting different regulatory requirements across various markets.
It sounds like they're really having to get innovative with how they design and build their products now.
Mhm.
What about understanding how we, the consumers, will react to potential price increases? How is market research helping there?
Yeah. Demand forecasting and price sensitivity analysis become essential in that area.
Figuring out how much people will pay?
Basically, yeah. Market research uses tools like conjoint analysis.
Hmm.
It's a technique that helps understand how consumers value different product features at different price points,
Okay.
along with data on past sales, overall market trends. Uses all that to understand how different customer groups might respond to price increases caused by these tariffs.
So not everyone reacts the same way.
Not at all. For example, a price hike on a very budget-friendly product might significantly reduce sales, whereas the same percentage increase on a high-end premium item might have a much smaller impact on demand.
Right.
Having this kind of detailed understanding allows companies to tailor their pricing strategies, plan their promotions more effectively, maybe offer different bundles, trying to maintain their revenue even in a challenging market.
So it's about understanding where they have some pricing power and where they might face significant resistance from consumers.
Okay.
And finally, with the global trade landscape being so, well, unpredictable right now,
Yeah.
how is market research helping them navigate the regulatory side of things?
Yeah.
The rules keep changing.
That's a huge one. Regulatory tracking and scenario planning have become absolutely critical.
Keeping up with the changes.
Exactly. The world of tariffs is constantly shifting. New restrictions pop up, retaliatory tariffs, new trade agreements are announced.
Yeah.
It's a lot to track. Market research teams that actively monitor these changes help companies build more flexible supply chain models. They can negotiate smarter contracts that maybe account for potential future tariffs. They can time their purchasing of components more strategically.
Trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Trying to, yeah. And scenario planning takes this a step further. It allows companies to run simulations, like what if simulations.
Okay, like what?
For example, what if China imposes further restrictions on the export of certain rare earth materials? Or what if the U.S. expands tariffs to cover, say, automobiles more broadly?
Right, planning for different futures.
Exactly. This kind of proactive analysis helps company leaders prepare not just for the current disruptions, but also for potential future shifts in global trade. It's about building long-term resilience into their operations.
It definitely sounds like market research has moved from being just a, helpful tool to an absolutely essential one in this climate. Are we seeing actual examples of how companies are strategically responding, like real-world actions?
We are indeed. The report highlights that many electronics companies are already making significant moves. It's not just talk.
Okay.
Major players like Apple, Dell, they've been actively diversifying their manufacturing locations for a while, but it's accelerating. Increasing production in countries like India and Vietnam.
Moving production out of China, or at least diversifying away.
Diversifying, yeah.
Yeah.
Adding options. We're also seeing smaller companies that design electronics, those OEMs we mentioned, forming more partnerships with local electronics manufacturing services providers, the EMS providers outside of China.
Using contract manufacturers elsewhere.
Right. Trying to avoid the tariff implications while still maintaining control over quality and production timelines. And companies like Flex and Jabil, which are major EMS providers themselves, they've even reported a significant increase in interest from clients specifically looking for production hubs outside of China. The demand is there.
So it's a real tangible shift in where these products are actually being made, or at least assembled. Are companies also exploring other ways to adapt beyond just moving production locations?
Yes, definitely. There's a growing trend of investing in digital technologies for their supply chains, using AI-powered systems, for example, for better predicting demand and optimizing their inventory.
Using tech to manage the chaos.
Sort of. These tools help manufacturers better anticipate changes in demand, streamline their purchasing processes, and try to lessen the impact of tariff-related delays or cost fluctuations. And we're also seeing some companies, as we touched on, actively re-engineering their products, really looking at the design to reduce their reliance on specific components that are primarily manufactured in China and subject to tariffs.
Right, designing around the problem.
Ultimately, it seems that the companies that will navigate this period most successfully are those that can combine agility, being able to move quickly with that research-driven foresight we've been discussing.
So not just reacting, but anticipating.
Exactly. They're not just reacting to changes in the market as they happen, but they're trying to anticipate them and adapt their strategies accordingly, evolving with the changes.
This has been a really, really deep dive
Mm.
and incredibly informative. Thank you. So to bring it all together, try and summarize, what would you say is the main takeaway from our discussion today about the impact of these 2025 tariffs on the U.S. electronics industry?
I think the core message really is that these tariffs are fundamentally reshaping the electronics industry. They're creating significant, widespread challenges across a whole multitude of subsectors. And that's largely due to the deep, long-established reliance on China for both critical components and overall manufacturing capabilities. It's a major shift.
A major shift indeed. And it sounds like the role of market research in helping companies navigate these, well, turbulent waters really can't be overstated.
Absolutely not. Market research is proving to be an essential compass right now, is helping companies understand these complex shifts, effectively mitigate the various risks involved, and strategically adapt their sourcing, their production, their pricing strategies. Basically, everything they need to do to successfully navigate this evolving global trade environment.
This certainly gives us, and hopefully you, the listener, a lot to consider thinking about the intricate, really interconnected nature of the global electronics supply chain. It
Hmm.
really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might these tariffs ultimately shape innovation and the availability of the consumer electronics we rely on in the years to come?
Good questions.
What other unforeseen consequences might emerge from this really significant shift in trade policy? That's definitely some food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.